There was something about the sourdough process itself that was way more attractive to me than just baking the average cupcake or throwing flour, water, eggs, butter, sugar, and making a cookie and throwing it in the oven. Being Jewish and having Shabbat dinner every Friday, and food it's centered around the culture that I think I grew up in. Now as an adult, I try to replicate the same sort of feeling through my own cooking and creating ritual around that, because it reminds me of my family. And family has now become one of the most important things in my life. So the difference between sourdough and regular baking bread is that sourdough uses an active starter, which is a combination of flour and water and the natural bacteria that live within that flour and water and the natural environment. The temperature of the room, the yeast in the air, that goes into the bread, and the bread itself becomes fermented. Regular bread that you're baking or baked goods, instead of it being fermented like sourdough, has these other active agents that help it rise. Baking soda, baking powder, that still taste great, but they might not be like a health food like the way that sourdough is. I started baking in my apartment with my friend Adi. I'll never forget the first loaf that I baked. He took a picture of it. It's like my favorite picture ever. From that day on, I fell madly in love with the process of baking sourdough bread itself. There's something beautiful about the process and the ritual around watching something grow. It feels like a science experiment, and it also feels like you're creating life. This is remarkable stuff. The sourdough process begins with the starter, which is called the mother. I have never created the starter myself. Typically, in sourdough fashion, you get a starter from someone else that already has a starter. Once you do the starter method, then you bring out your bowl and you mix in flour and water, and you let that sit and hydrate.
There's no turning back, right?
There's no turning back. I felt like, for the first time, that the way I was engaging with food was medicinal. There is something very healing and beautiful about creating something from scratch, gifting it to yourself, gifting it to other people. There's a big emphasis on gut bacteria that they help to flourish. After 30 minutes or so, you can add in the starter and you add in salt. And that's it for basic sourdough. Bacteria in sourdough is the most crucial thing. When bacteria starts to form, it starts to eat away at the gluten and helps make gluten more digestible in our bodies. The bacteria already did the work for you. That's a beautiful thing. It shouldn't be something we're afraid of. There is something called the stretch and fold, where you basically stretch and fold the dough over itself to a point where the dough becomes very plump and round, and you can place it in the fridge and let the dough ferment for up to 24 hours, which is a long time for bread. People want bread like this, you know? Sourdough, you have to be patient. The dough itself is now fermenting and rising on its own without any active yeast, just the bacteria that you started with. After 24 hours, then you can place it into a little basket, you shape it, and you leave it in the basket for a few hours, and then it's ready to bake. I had to do a lot of testing because the temperature outside changes. That affects how the starter rises and their fermentation process. Using different flours. Oh, I only have whole wheat and spelt. What do I do? Say you want to add cranberries or walnuts. You experiment based on a specific ratio that you're supposed to use. One thing that I want to distinguish is that you can bake desserts using the sourdough method. So it's not just exclusive to bread. You can use the starter, which is very unique to the sourdough process. You can put that in a dough that you could use for cookies, for cakes. I make sourdough pancakes, waffles, scones. Food and cooking became a sacred practice. It wasn't just this chore. Taking your healing literally into your own hands, the way you touch food, the way you smell food, and then digesting it. And the baking process is the best part because you never know how your bread is going to turn out, no matter how much you've planned, no matter how articulate you've been with the dough and meticulous with the ingredients. There's always an element of surprise about how it's going to turn out, and if you choose to design it, how the design is going to bake. Can you see?
Yeah, it looks plump.
It looks plump. And the more that I got attached to the results of it, like the design not looking great or the bread deflating in the back, it actually made me kind of like appreciate the quirks and the weird aspects of the bread that, might be deemed undesirable. I made them desirable over time. And I was like, you know what? This is my bread. What can I do? And then when you make a bread that you think is perfect, you're like, wow, it's worth the practice of just showing up to it. And then, cutting open to a fresh sourdough. You should usually wait 20 minutes or like an hour for it to cool. It's really hard, but then you can slice it open, and I always have it with butter. Whoa, that's a nice piece of sourdough.
Wow, it's steaming too.
It's steaming. And sharing the gift with others. We weren't hoarding all the bread. There's an exchange that happens when you bake something that is really special. Yeah. It's important as I move on in this ever-changing world to have things that are simple, that remind me of my humanity and the larger web of life. He's gonna make you look really good.
Yeah, this made me look so good.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to discover more hobbies and visit notjustahobby.com to learn more.